Well, welcome to On the Record. I'm super excited about the episode today because this episode is with one of my new favorite people that I've really been able to get to know because we've worked together for a few years now in general and even closer now over the past year. And it's such a special piece because I know she's also a music fan, but we also have such wonderful conversation and I wanted you all to be a part of it today. So, if you are coming to On the Record for the first time, let me tell you what we do here. So, do you know those moments where you're listening and you're zoning out, and for some reason there is whatever on your Spotify or maybe your vinyl player, or maybe back in high school when you was playing your CD and you connected to an album or an artist or a song and you didn't know why? That's what we talk about here. We talk about those songs, those records, those albums that have made big imprints on our lives, where it was through a hard time, through a great time, a wonderful memory, whatever that is. And we talk about how that's impacted us. And this is basically where music and mental health meet. And I love these conversations because they always go to different levels of just understanding in the human experience. And I think music helps play a huge part in that. I'm a strong believer, and music is what feelings sound like. And I think being able to use that as a piece of therapy is incredible. And I know I've used it quite a bit. Sometimes people don't have access to therapy or aren't familiar with it, but everybody has access to music in some way or fashion. And so let's talk about how that impacts us. And that's what we're going to do today. So, one of the things that I usually ask my guests inside our intake when I'm learning a little bit more about them and the choices that they're making for the episode is what impact music's played in their lives. And you literally said it's a part of my everyday life, like inside of yours. So when did you first start your love affair with music?
Oh my gosh. Well, it was when we were still listening to cassette tapes.
Yes.
And, well, there were like two, because I remember like one, my parents always remind me of when we were going, they were surprising me to go to Disney World, and I had no idea. But I was listening to music in the backseat, and it was Spice Girls. And my mom, I think, to this day, questions whether she should have let me listen to this. She also took me to Spice World at the age of 5.
You know what?
Which I think was a PG-13 movie at the time, but it became a quick and fast classic. But I remember I was listening to the song like "Tell Me What You Want."
Yeah.
And so like, if you want to be my lover, you got to get with my friends. And thank God I like could not get like the exact wording correctly, because my parents were just like, they're sitting in the front seat and they're just like, should she be listening to this? So like, but I have no idea, because obviously I'm like, well, you just like, they want to be friends, and they're going to have more friends. Right. But I'd say, like, between them and Hanson and, like, Mbop.
Come on, Hanson, yes!
I think my mom probably wanted to burn that one, and I'm sure that, like, because I don't have those cassettes anymore, and so I think, like, it's a sad thing. My mom's also, like, anti-hoarding. But I think, like, I was, like, 3 or 4, like, when these things started, and my parents always listened to music, driving me to, like, school. And we'd always listen to the station 99X, which was like an alternative radio station. And there was a song by like the Volcano Girls. And it was like, "Leave Me Lying Here," because I don't want to go. And I would always like belt that out because I was like, I don't want to go to school, Dad.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't want to do it. And so I'd always listen to this alternative radio station. And they brought it back recently in the last few years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's kind of, I feel like the nostalgia of like, when I was little, I was like a girly girl. But I also started to like Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, and all that. And of course, Volcano Girls, which I still love hearing on 99X. But yeah, it was probably when I was really little, because my parents love music.
Yes.
So they got me to love music.
Yeah.
And my parents were cool back in the day. They're still cool now, if they're listening.
Yeah.
But back in the day, that was really what got me there.
I love it, because you're also a vinyl collector just like I am.
I am.
Yes.
My husband, though, is the one that started that in the household, so it's probably like a 70-30 him to me.
Yeah.
But I'm slowly contributing to that collection.
Yes. It's one of my favorite things in general, because yes, the music is phenomenal, but for me, it's the scratch.
It is, and I think also it like forces you to like appreciate the rest of, because like I think it's so easy for me to like pick a song or just like be like, I really want to listen to this, and then you get to your like Spotify Wrapped and you're like, did I listen to that song like 68,000 times? And it's like, I probably did. But the nice thing with vinyl is like, you can't skip a song. I mean, you could.
You could, but you don't.
And then you have to flip it over, and then as it's hitting the end, and then you like hear the needle, or when you put it on.
Yeah.
There's something that's so nice in the tangibility of it that you just don't get with your phone or like our good old iPods that we used to have to like curate, or burn CDs where you actually had to put in a little bit of effort.
Right. When we burned CDs, that was a whole other ball game, and we finally got to start making mixed CDs.
I still have a ton of them, but
I
don't bring them in my car enough. And I do have a CD player, but I need to, I need to start doing it again. But yeah, your vinyl collection probably far surpasses anything that John and I have.
Look, let me be very clear. I'm also just a problem when I go into a vinyl shop. Meaning I have zero control, and I'm literally like a kid in a candy store. And I have a credit card in my hand.
But there's worse things.
Yes, there's definitely worse
things.
So
that's like, I don't think there's anything wrong with
But
this.
My problem is I go all the time. So
you may need to...
I might need to go less for it to be less impactful to my pockets. But it's everything. Like, I just got all of those last week. That stack.
But again, and I love Leon Bridges.
Right. Yes.
So I was like, good choice. Good choice.
Yes. But it's such a thing. So I had to mention that because we were both collecting vinyls and on that journey. But it's so funny as we kind of like really dig into the artist and the album that you chose today, which I love because it was introducing me to something completely different because I had never heard of it. So tell our listeners who you chose for this one.
So I ended up choosing Phantogram. They have been around for, since the mid 2000s, if not earlier. And they're going back on tour in 2025. So we're going to go.
Ooh, yes.
So it made me think of it because I was like, I'm going to go see them in January at Tabernacle back in Atlanta. And my husband was actually the one that introduced them to me originally. And it was definitely, I feel like it's been a part of our relationship, but also me going through my 20s. And I look back and I was like, I've probably been listening to them for over 10 years now. So I wasn't early on, but highly recommend all of their work. And they do a lot of stuff with Big Boy too, which I thought was really cool.
Yes, and that's one of the really cool things is every single time I have guests come on and they choose their albums or their songs, I listen to them all before you all get here.
Oh, I love that.
And I get into the zone with it just because I want to know what you feel inside of those moments and listen to the lyrics and the melodies and all of that. And I loved it because I listened to it all last night. And I was like, this is fantastic. And you had put in your intake, it's the vibe of the song and the ability to kind of zone out a little bit. And it's perfect for that. And I was I can absolutely see someone falling in love with this energy and really being able to check out in those moments where you really feel like you need to check out.
1,000%.
And so you were talking about this inside of your 20s and how this was affecting you. Where were you at that specific time where this started to really be a kind of a staying grace for you?
Yeah, so I call it the adulting version 1 of me.
Yeah.
And right out of college, I had gotten this job, and obviously Rashina and I had met, but I'd gotten this job and I was being sent to Kentucky, which I was like,
oh no.
I'm from Atlanta. I went to school in Tennessee.
Yeah.
I was like, Kentucky was I think the last on my list of places that I would go.
Yeah.
And then when my dad told me it was Cincinnati, Ohio, and no shade to Cincinnati, Ohio, because I love Cincinnati now.
Yeah.
But I cried at an intramural soccer game when I found out that I was going there.
Oh, no.
And because I was I don't know anyone in Cincinnati.
Right.
I and taking this job that I also told my parents I was not going to take the job because there was, a boy that I liked that I wanted to go follow, and they were like, that never ends well. And I'm like, but Mom, Dad,
yeah.
it will involve. My mom's like, yeah, so you're
in your 20s, it always will.
It's always so delusional. And so, you know, I am like 21 at the time, and I'm moving to Cincinnati all by myself. And I remember like saying like goodbye to my dad, essentially. I think like at the halfway point, I like drove the rest of the way of myself up there. And I was just so afraid to like start a new job, like pay rent on my own,
right.
Which, you know what, like shout out to like coming out of college and doing that. I was like, that was a lot.
Yeah.
But no, I was just, you know, it was my first like kind of big thing that I was doing by myself, where there was really like no one else with me. And it was going into a field that I felt very unprepared and just such an imposter, and very young, honestly, at the site that I work at. And it was, you know, a time where it was like I met a lot of new people, and I, you know, where honestly too, in like my first year being there and being put on a night shift, like where I started to experience like what anxiety looked like as an adult, and not having the same sort of other habits or things that I could lean towards when I was in college, that I didn't even realize that that's probably how anxiety was manifesting itself. And I think that's really where, like, you know, I have a lot of connection of Phantogram to that time, because there was a lot of good things that were going on, but then a lot of things that I was personally struggling with that like no one else like knew about, because well, when you're on nights and you're up by yourself on the days that you're off, no one else is up with you,
right? And
you have a lot of alone time and a lot of you time to like be with your brain, and like sometimes that's not always a good thing.
It's so true. Especially at that point. And I love how you're talking about that transition to what adulting is in that phase, because we're all terrified. Let's be very clear. At that moment where you're like, oh, like all this is on me.
Yeah.
And everything.
And I've been, you know, someone that was like very privileged to always have my parents as like there for me, and like, you know, realizing like the true privilege I had, especially when I like became a college student, and like realizing like, you know, as you're meeting tons of people from all different walks of life, and even going into Amazon and meeting people that were coming from all different walks of life and different levels of privilege, to me, it was also kind of like something that I think really snapped me into like, oh, this is what like the real world actually looks like. Not this world that I was living in before. And again, that's where it's just like, when you hear certain songs, they bring up certain memories, and like you can always connect with people like over music. And so, well, Phantogram would not have been what I was connecting with people personally that I was working with. It was something for me that I connected with the love interest that later became my boyfriend and husband, of wanting to like impress him, that I was like, oh yeah, like I know what Phantogram is.
Right.
I had no idea what Phantogram was at the time. I was like, yeah, I love their work. It's so good.
So good.
I was like, is it one person? Is it two people? People? And obviously, you know, have come to love them over time. But at that time I was like, yeah, no, I have no idea who these people are.
Yeah, it's funny because you stumble upon those things too, and that's the one thing I do love, is sharing music across friends or family, or when you meet brand new people that you wouldn't normally find or stumble upon yourself. And just like even doing this and being able to listen to that album last night, I was like, this is freaking amazing. Like, and I loved it. But I would have never ran across Phantogram on any one of, you know, the many things my, you know, streaming service will shoot me. Right? Because it's going to give you what you like. Right? So I think that is one thing that I love most about music as a language and meeting people, is just opening up your genres. And just tapping into a few different things, because it's such a beautiful thing to really be able to connect to different kinds of music, because we're all saying the same thing, just in a different way. Right? Like, it's creative energy. One thing I did love about what you mentioned is like trying to work through that first part of yourself and anxiety, because most people don't really sit down and talk about anxiety and what that actually feels like, or what it really is. And I know you've had your own journey with it. Where was that point inside of that current time in your life, present time with, you know, Phantogram and finding adulting? what was the biggest struggle for you in that moment and trying to manage what that was?
I think it was, I mean, in the building and the work that I was doing is, there were not a lot of women or female allies. My manager, when I was on day shift, I had one female ops manager that was really great that I worked for. And then when I moved to nights, I was back working with all men. And I think going into any sort of like manufacturing, warehousing, like fulfillment type role, it's typically, and at that time, right, that's 2014, which doesn't feel like a long time ago, but it is in terms of like representation at Amazon in particular of very male dominated. And it wasn't a field that women were seeking out either, right? So for me, being only 21 and being sent to night shift, which I think was such a great thing for me because it helps me to establish like who I was individually. But on the flip side too is I think that's where I started to see that when it came to like performance and wanting to like be the best and show up well against my peers, some of which were my senior by 10, 15, 20 years. And wanting to be able to like differentiate myself from them is I think I started to realize that I was putting so much pressure on myself. And again, on those days that you aren't working, when I'm at work, that was a great outlet for me. But when I was at home, I didn't have those outlets because there wasn't someone I could call up at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. to, say like, hey, like, what are you doing? Or, hey, do you want to hang out? Because there was only a handful of us. And so it was such a small site. There were very few people that were on night shift with me. So I would see those folks on the weekend, but otherwise I was by myself. And so I realized I didn't have like a constructive outlet. And so I would just sit with my thoughts and think about like, in a way that I was just this fraud, which wasn't the case. And obviously, I didn't always work for people that really helped to empower me as a female leader. And it wasn't later on that I really started to find those people in my Amazon career that were also male allies, but I just felt very alone. And I didn't know of like how to talk to someone about it. And so then I would feel these instances that I had never felt before where I would genuinely like, I would feel OCD where it was like, I felt like I was having to do things multiple times or perfectly in just my outside work life. I was fine when I was at work. But I just found myself really struggling with like functioning daily. And, that was predominantly on night shift. But even when I moved back to days and, moved away, like it went away, but then it came back. And I think for myself is I just thought that, I would go through these cycles where it would surface and then it would go away because I'd find something to pour myself into. And at the time it was, I would work out a ton. And I got super thin when I was on nights because I was not eating, working out a ton. But again, when you're working out, what are you usually doing? Listening to music. And so like there would be Phantogram and I'd be like hearing that and like as you listen to like the songs and they are just like very entrancing. It's like I'd be running on the treadmill and it's like, okay, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 miles can go by and it's just listening to them is like I can always think about the different songs and some of the songs are like from that album, but others like When I'm Small, like hearing those songs is like those songs are so it's like haunting in a good and bad way. But I associate that with that time because that's where I was.
That's mentally also where you were, right? Like you're just trying to figure it out. And I like that you mentioned like, look, being in a male dominated industry that we typically are in at this point, we've been with the company for a very long time at this point. And watching the evolution, but at those moments, because I started on night shift. I was on back half nights for my first 18 months, I think, of my career, mostly men, and just really trying to get your footing on what does all of this mean? Also, am I the right fit for this? Because clearly I'm not seeing anybody that looks like me. Am I in the wrong place? Did I make a terrible decision? Right? Like, what do all these things look like for me to be successful? Am I successful? Because I'm overanalyzing myself. Like, those kinds of things start creeping in, and you mentioned in the beginning, imposter, like where you do feel like an imposter. For you, as just a leader in general, how have you been able to kind of work yourself through that? Because not everybody has solved that problem, because I have those moments still now. But are there tools that you're able to use now, having been at the company for over a decade, um, that you can give tools to some of our listeners who might be dealing with the same thing now?
Yeah, and similar to what you just said, like I think it's something you have to like continue to work at.
Yeah.
And I think as I've changed roles and different responsibilities at Amazon, like I'd be lying to myself to say like I haven't continued to add pressure, and instead of pressure, it continues to mount, because it's like you feel like as you move up with any organization, right? The pressure to show up not only for yourself, but actually more so everyone else around you.
Yes.
That's where the pressure really lies. And I think for myself is like going into this year is, and we were talking a little earlier about like taking some really intentional time to really understand like where anxiety is surfacing from.
Yes.
And like how to actually think about like where and why is this coming up, and instead of trying to think about other habits, which again, whether it's working out too much, or it might be overeating, or it might be getting on social media and rotting the tay away on TikTok, which I do love doing but have deleted to give myself a bit of a break, is taking time to actually read and understand a bit more about myself. And because it's something where it's like I've gone to therapy and I've, tried to talk to someone, getting medication, which are all those things have been helpful.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you go into that emotional hijacking, it's really hard to come back from that.
Yeah.
And, I think for myself is like, each person's obviously very different, and how we all handle our anxiety is very different. And, it's pretty startling to know, like, I think it's like over 70% of the world post like COVID suffer from some form of anxiety, and I have generalized anxiety disorder, so I don't suffer as much from panic attacks, but those can happen. But I'd say for me, like where I have found the most success is one, taking the time to address it through modern medicine, but also when I pick healthier outlets, when I do choose to work out, but not overwork out.
Yeah.
It's doing it because it's something that I can pour myself into. Again, I can listen to music. Or if it's, going to spend time with my parents.
Yes.
Like, I love to go spend time with my family.
Yeah.
If it's doing something with John and going to see a movie, like, it's trying to, like, pull myself into reality of, like, right now versus taking time behind a screen.
Yes.
That's where I feel like that for me has become a place where I end up finding myself getting more anxious.
Yeah, I like that.
Than when I take some time to actually be present in the moment. But again, I'd be a hypocrite to say that it's like, I'm not good about that.
Thank you. Like, I agree. Same. Like, I think that's such an important piece to mention, especially for our listeners who are kind of getting into this conversation, really understanding that when it comes to anxiety, because I have noticed that I started to struggle with it in the past 2 years or so, it's easy to get stuck in the loop, right? Like, and the loop continues until you try to figure your way out of it, or calm yourself. But at the same time, the lack of being present, like you just mentioned, is usually part of the root of the problem, right? Because we're usually worrying about something that has happened or is going to happen. So We're not here. And so, like, forcing yourself into the present is a win. Because I was actually talking to my therapist about this 3 weeks ago, because I was struggling and I was in like a little bit of a cycle. I wasn't sleeping well, and I just didn't know how to get my nervous system to calm down. And I was like, I need help. Give me something. Like, please. Is there a tool I can use? Is there a technique I can use? What are some options? And one thing she had actually told me, she said, well, there's some physical actions to take, because when you do something physical to your actual body, it forces your brain to focus on what's physically happening. So she said, so that's why people will have a weighted blanket or take a cold shower as a shock or do things like that, or like tapping, like people do tapping to put them in a present state. And she said there's one thing that actually also helps. It's actually jumping up and down in one place. And she says it's the strangest thing, but she learned this from another person, that jumping up and down will lower your anxiety. Like, you'll slowly feel your body calm itself in that moment because it's focusing on the action of jumping. And she's like, it's almost immediate. So I was like, so I'm going to be like jumping in the middle of a grocery store aisle, like in one place.
Hey.
And she said, you can do it anywhere you want to. And I did it actually the next day. I was like, I wonder. And I was like, she's right. My body calmed. But there's really small techniques, but it's also just about being present. Mm-hmm. And I struggle being present all the time, but that's just me, and I'm working through that.
Well, no, and I think, so many people, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tap on my chest, and I notice I do that a lot, or I have like restless leg syndrome. Even this one on my flight today had that, and I was like, wow, this is why people will be like, why are you shaking your leg, baby? And I'm like, because it's like your nervous energy has to go somewhere.
Yeah, it has to go somewhere. Yeah.
I think the biggest thing too about anxiety, right, is it's like the fear of the unknown is what triggers that. And it's when you think about the example that I was reading about was when you are little and you go to cross the street and your mom, or dad tells you, hey, no, you don't want it, you have to wait.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that if you jump into the middle of the street, right, you could potentially get hit by a car.
Yes.
Or you need to wait before you walk in. So your brain picks up that pattern.
Yes.
Whereas, someone like self who really flies a lot but hates flying is it's because I don't know.
Yes.
In that situation what could or couldn't happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's when it's how can you pull into the science of it, or being rational in the sense of if something did happen, right?
Yeah.
Here are the logical outcomes that, or what we would do in that instance. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the part too, is learning those triggers for yourself too.
Yeah.
And how to remove yourself from those situations, or how to manage in real time because you know what that looks like.
Yes.
And so whether it's, jumping up and down, tapping, or just taking a minute to take a breath. Mm-hmm. Or, sometimes if it's hot, I'll go outside and cool down real quick, come back inside, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah. Because
I'm back.
The temperature shock. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I love that. And I love that you brought up being present, because I was like, damn, that's it. A light bulb went off in my head. It's just really being present in the moment to kind of start calming. Because also, what I did not know either that she told me is that when you're at a heightened sense of kind of neural output, right? I'm because I was frustrated. I was like, I know my tools. I just can't access them. I don't understand. She's like, well, when you're that stimulated, that side of your brain and this side of it can't work at the same time. Mm-hmm. Right? So you have to deregulate for this side to be able to trigger and start, doing the logical things or start using your tools. So that's why you have to deregulate to get to a calm state for the other things to kick in. And I was like, oh, that makes sense.
And it's while in the moment you think you're going to die.
Right.
It may be super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But you're not going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I've convinced myself a number of times, I was like, this is it. This is the moment.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, okay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we're good. We made it.
Yeah.
But it's all of that where it's it's your body just reacting, and then it's, how can you coax it to realize in that moment that it's hey, I need to be able to focus, but we have too many forms of the internet, and it's for all the good that it brings, all the bad that it brings.
Yeah.
And all of the options that you have, and it's information overload. Because it's a combination of good information, but misinformation.
Right.
And it's things like that, again, that overstimulate all of us and kind of bring you to that point. And it's, again, how can you, whether it's using music or something to center yourself or reading or like those are those things where it's like if it can put you on one thing to focus on and it like actually sounds and like drowns out the rest of the noise around you, those are those things of like how music can be super powerful because it's whatever you're choosing to listen to at that time. Can, you know, for when you need that energy or when you need to like calm down, like that's when music is something that it's like, it's a gift in that sense.
It's such a huge gift. Because it can do that amped up, like, people use music to get hyped all the time. Like, okay, I'm getting ready. Like, look, I do that before I start to go on stage and I might be facilitating or something like that. I'm getting amped. Like, my headphones are in and I'm like, it's like game time, right? But there's the moments and those triggering moments, and you're talking about anxiety or other things that are going on that are a little trauma inducing, where you're like, okay, so how can I get brought down? And music is a wonderful way to tap into that, because I've used it multiple times myself too, to just get myself in a zone. I'm a person who loves like jazz, R&B. That's my vibe. That's always my number one go-to, just because I feel like my natural life is overstimulated with the amount of travel, people I talk to, calls I'm on, doing all of the things, where I'm like, no, now it's time to put this.
And it
like,
just takes you.
Yeah, like coming down off the high of the day. Like, even getting in the car and everything is silent for like 4 or 5 minutes, you're like, oh.
Just so nice. It's so sociopathic.
Yeah, I love it.
But I think that's part of, you know, when you work and when you're still working in SEM, when I was working into it, is all you hear all day are conveyors and alarms. And then people on the radio and copy this, Roger that. What? Where are you located? Where can I find you? Exactly. And it's, you know, when you get into the car and the silence, and you're like, 45 minutes goes by on my commute, and I'm like, I didn't listen to anything. Yeah, it's so nice.
Sometimes that's exactly what you need. Like, sometimes that's exactly what you need. And another episode we had, one of my guests was talking about that very thing. He was like, yeah, for like the first 4 or 5 minutes after work and I'm driving, there is silence. Right? The most beautiful silence in the world, because he's a firefighter, right? So he's like, I just need those few minutes. And then it's like, okay, what do I want to put on to either get me pumped to go home and get ready for what's about to happen, or calm me down going home. Like, you get to choose.
Exactly. You know, again, that's probably a reason why Nuckety Buck is still on my top songs every year. And honestly, I think Sexy Red she's earning a spot in my heart. And she's great. Yes. Like, she's 10 out of 10.
Amazing.
But it's like, there's a reason why certain songs, it's like year after year, still are on. Like,
absolutely.
And because it's like, when you need that, and sometimes I do need to get hyped up to go home.
Yes.
Because then I'm like, it's gonna be 7 p.m. and I think I want to work out. And it's like, or then there's the times I don't. And then the music reflects that. And the music is more relaxed. Like, you know, I think it's just time to go to bed.
Yeah.
Or go put on Real Housewives.
Right.
And I am gonna go rot on my couch for a couple of hours. And there's nothing wrong with that.
There is nothing wrong with that. But it can take you to all of those places. And I love this conversation because anxiety is something, and it's funny because we're all now aware of it. I think it's a buzzword at this point, and I'm like, you don't understand. There's actual diagnosis to this, and there's people who struggle with this on a serious clinical level, and there's definitely different levels of it, and that's perfectly fine. But really understanding what it is and how that happens to someone is incredibly important, because understanding the human experience means asking more questions to be more knowledgeable, to be able to help and support and understand, right? Like, you really do get to connect with people once you understand.
Yeah, and I'm so envious of people. And to your point, I think with the buzzword is, you know, I think so. Everyone can be anxious to some degree. And I think, you know, for me, I like see people around me and, you know, like sometimes I'm just envious of like when they say they're anxious and it's like, but I was like, they just don't seem anxious at all. And then it's inside, like, you just can almost feel like you're coming out of your skin. And,
Yeah.
you know, again, it's, you know, you have good times and bad times with it. And, you know, times when you feel like you're managing it better than others. But, you know, I do think it's something where it's like understanding, you know, that you don't understand what other people around you are going through, and, you know, not trying to diagnose others around you, but also, you know, not putting like guilt on yourself of thinking, you know, what's wrong with me? Because I think that was something that was so early on that I always thought was like, what is wrong with me? And I think it was even from when I was little. I used to always have my parents like feel my head before I went to bed.
Aww.
And to be like, am I sick? Am I dying? Do I have a temperature?
Right.
And like WebMD is like the worst thing that's ever, you know, come about.
You should have never gotten that.
Well, like, and my parents are always like, do you have a degree in any sort of medical? And I'm like, no. But based off of all of these symptoms, I definitely have some form of like cancer. And they're like,
not really.
No, definitely not.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's the thing.
But you knew something wasn't right.
And it was really just, it was, again, anxiety that it reared its head in other ways. And then it isn't until you really get a little older, and I fought my parents, especially my mom, about actually addressing it and talking to someone. And I think it was really, I think a lot of people were after COVID, and people that worked through COVID, and I worked in an FC during COVID. And I think at that point in time, you know, seeing my parents, they both got COVID very early, and, you know, being so stressed out, but also like not probably supporting my parents because I was so concerned with what was going on at work. And I was like, can I go see them? But then also like, for me is like, honestly, I felt like a negligent daughter at that point in time. And, you know, it wasn't until like after I moved out of the FC into a corporate role that I think that's where my anxiety went from something that I was managing to being entirely unmanageable. Like agoraphobic, like not leaving my house. And thinking like, no matter where I went or what I did, I was putting myself in a situation that I couldn't control, and I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. So I didn't want to put myself in that situation.
Thank you for sharing that, because there are definitely people out there who are probably dealing with the same thing, and they don't know what it is, right? And they're like, I'm just scared. Like fear is taking over, when in reality there's just something happening that you might not have pinpointed what's starting to trigger this response in your body. And being able to talk to somebody about it is, in my opinion, crucial. One, to say you're not crazy, right? Like, that's the first thing, because I can't stand that word. It drives me bananas. But also, like, hey, this is something that is, for lack of a better term, normal. We can work through it, right? And I think it's something that is incredibly important for people to understand. They don't have to suffer alone and feel like they're the only one going through it, because there's millions of people going through it. Sometimes it might just take a conversation like this. You're like, oh, and you can learn something, or the tools, and you can jump up and down, and there's so many different things that can come in. You can start using, you know, medication, which is not a bad thing, and don't allow people to convince you that having medication help you regulate is a bad thing. Sometimes it's just necessary, and there is nothing wrong with that. I just had to make sure I said that, because people start to judge, and they have no place to do so.
No, absolutely not.
Even a little bit. But one thing I like to ask most of my guests towards the end, and our listeners and their journey and with music and trying to have it help them and be a level of therapy for them, what is something you would recommend anybody trying to figure out their music style and their journey right now to do, that you've probably been able to now experience and do over years with your love affair with music? What's a tip for it?
I mean, I think it's putting yourself out there in the sense of like, listen to everything. Like, I have found a partner that I went to go see the Black Dahlia murder. It was a heavy metal. Great instrumentalist. Between the Berry and Me, great instrumentalist.
Yeah.
I have now determined not for me. But I think the biggest thing is like, you know what, is like ask what your friends are listening to. Like I think with Phantogram, like and why I love them so much is one, I think with Big Grams and like that tie of Big Boy and Back to Atlanta. And you know, I've seen Phantogram perform live so many times. And the last time I saw them was with Big Boy at Shaking East in Atlanta, and it was such a great show. But I think for me, like with them in particular, is like, you know, they're like the love story of my relationship because that was the first show me and my husband went to together. It was the song that we walked into at our wedding. And I think with that is like, he opened up my eyes to so many different types of music. And, you know, being from the South, like, of course, I loved rap. In college, I had a short love affair with country. My parents obviously had me listening to alternative music, but it's also, it's like being open-minded to listening to different things. And I sometimes find myself connecting more with songs than artists because I'm like, I just love how that made me feel in the moment. Versus, and then you can, you know, you slowly fall in love with those different artists. But I think for everyone, it's like, there's a journey. And like, you know, for me, I always try to rotate back into things I listened to a while ago because of the way that it made me feel and the memories that it like brings. And I think that's why like music is something that's always been so special, is because it's something that can always bring back that memory that is typically positive. And even those that aren't, you know, in movies, when you see, it's never like the scene in the movie.
It's the music.
It's the song that's playing that like makes you feel like a certain way. And you know, when at the end of, and because of the holidays, like Love Actually, when the end and like they're in the airport and they're running through, and it's like that combined with the music and like the cinematography in that. You would honestly like, you are like emotionless and Satan. It's like you don't like find yourself getting like a little bit choked up.
Exactly. And I am a 9-year-old boy chasing this American girl.
This American girl who has a stunningly like very mature voice for her age. But it's those things that it's like, you know, by meeting my partner who had totally opposite taste in music, we share Spotify, so every year the rap is just really on opposite ends. But we've come to find that like a commonality of things that we love to do is like go listen to live music. You know, we love Killer Mike, we love Run the Jewels. And again, those are things that like we as like a couple like ended up like having that love together. And so I think, you know, it's just something like by going and like asking what your friends are listening to or giving it a try. A band that I started listening to recently, Susto, which is like a local band out of Georgia. One of my good friends, Caroline, her and her husband are like such big Susto fans. And like the music, it's like very easy listening, but it's kind of like folky and like Americana. And it's something where it's like, that's great on like a summer day, like your summer evening, you go and listen, having a beer or non-alcoholic beer or whatever you're drinking. But it's things like that. It's like by like being open to like hearing that, it's like you also learn a lot about the people that you're friends with, but you bond over that type of stuff as well. And you don't always have to love like the music that your friends are listening to or others listening to, but it's like you can appreciate it. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's always like, I love asking what my friends are listening to. Again, I'm not a Morgan Wallen girly, but I'll listen to and get him a shot. I know a lot of people who love Morgan Wallen. Exactly. Right? And he has some good music. Is it for me?
Maybe not. That's okay.
But maybe Sexy Red and My Girl Megan Thee Stallion aren't for other people, right? Like, it's totally fine.
Right. Exactly. I love that. So keep your eyes and ears open, especially, and give yourself the opportunity to learn some new artists and songs is the tip for today. But I loved this conversation, and I hope all of you as listeners got to really tap in and take some nuggets away on really helping yourself deal with stress, or if you suffer from anxiety, there's some little gems and pieces in there that can probably help you work through your day-to-day or even initiate a conversation. So I love that so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank
Katie,
you.
like, I love you, and you know I love you real hard.
No, I love you real hard.
So all of you, I would love to also hear from you. So in the chats, in the comments, on the website, drop the songs that helped you kind of mellow out and get into a zone that you need to when you may be struggling with something. I want to hear about it. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.